Dear ladies and gentlemen, liebe Damen und Herren, шановні пані і панове, уважаемые дамы и господа. The first words designates the four working languages that we today will use. And you have the headsets. Please use them correctly. Channel 1 is for English, Channel 2 for German, Channel 3 for Ukrainian, and Channel 4 for the Russian languages. Don't forget to return your headsets when you will be leaving today, otherwise your important documents will be kept by the organizers. And although these people are very honest and won't abuse your documents, who knows, maybe you will need them every moment. My name is Andriy, and I'm welcoming you to the International Forum Overcoming Russia's War Against Ukraine, Strengthening Links Between Political Decision Makers and Civil Society Organizations in Europe. There's another very important person in this hall with a microphone, Roberta. And the importance of Roberta is not that she is just one of you, one of the civil activists, but she will provide you with an opportunity to ask questions of our esteemed panelists. I warn you beforehand that she won't surrender her microphone to you, because then it is very hard to get the mic back. But if you want to ask a question, please raise your hands and we'll provide you with the word. However, this will happen a bit later. If I weren't in Berlin this day, I would probably now be composing my tomorrow's radio show. And I am on air 5 days a week from 8 to 10 a.m. Ukrainian time, talking to Ukrainians and also to those who care to listen to us in other countries through our website about what's happening in Ukraine and around Ukraine. And composing the program, I would probably be calling Oleksandra Romansova from the Center for Civil Liberties and asking her which of the important things that they have done today is worthy of mentioning and explaining to the broad public tomorrow. Mind you, not what have you done, but which of the things that you have done. And I mention Oleksandra because she's probably the last person I spoke to before I went to Berlin, because each and every one of you are engaged in very important work, of which sometimes the general public does not know much or enough. Because modesty and the underestimation of publicity is characteristic of the civil society actors. You often think, we have done this, we have done our bit, and we are satisfied with it. But it is important that your best practice is spread, that your best practice is known about, and that your best practice is shared. Please think of this as sharing. Sometimes people who are given the word at such conferences or otherwise say, I don't want to take too much of your time. Please remember, you're not taking our time, you're sharing your time with us. But of course, there will be a strict procedure here, and I, as a moderator, will be reminding you of time limits. When looking at some of the posters at the exhibition in the hall, I spotted the words written by, or either spoken by Nicole. She's one of the people to whom CivilMPlus talked, collecting their impressions about the war, their thoughts about the war, and how to deal with it. And Nicole says, in times like these, you need to ask yourself what you can do to deal with these horrible things, or something to this effect. You may go and then check whether I'm rather accurate in quoting Nicole. Yes, you are asking yourself every day, probably every hour, what you can do. But at the same time, by your deeds, by your actions, sometimes by your words announcing your actions, you provide answers. And this is very important. And you not only tell people what to do, what may other people do. Equally important is to learn from others, from people like you, from people who understand you, from people who do not understand you, from people who are ambivalent in their attitude towards what is going on. So you are proactive, you are knowledgeable, you are modest, you are many. And there are other important actors in this field who represent what we usually call political milieu, or officialdom, or whatever. One of the tasks that stands in front of us is to provide for the synergy between different actors in this entire world, and to show that we can borrow from each other resilience, knowledge, best practice, attitude. Attitude is very important. So our first panel, which is called, very simply, Opening Session, Introduction and Remarks by Co-Organizers, is to set up the tone in which we will work for these 2 days. Because the tone in which we work, in which you work for many, many months, and some of you have been working for many, many years, and I have no doubt that you will work further, has been already set. It's been set, again, by your dedication, but by your lack of fear, sometimes by mistakes, which are unavoidable when you deal with something for the first time. But most of all, it is set by your adherence to human rights, civil liberties, and the understanding of the preciousness of every human being. So, having said that, I introduce briefly the people who are on the stage with me, and they are Oleksandra Slotty, who is the State Secretary for Education from the Office of the Mayor of Berlin, Maksym Yemelyanov, who is Deputy Ambassador from the Embassy of Ukraine in Germany, and Matthias Lüttenberg, Ambassador Representative for Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia from the German Federal Foreign Office. But the first person to speak to us online has to be Oleksandra Matviychuk. She is a prominent Ukrainian human rights activist, and she is from the Center for Civil Liberties, which I mentioned already. And she is a 2022 Nobel Prize winner, Nobel Prize laureate, if to be strict, and she'll speak on behalf of CivilMPlus from Kyiv. Do we have Oleksandra? Yes.
Thank you very much for providing me the floor. It's a huge honor for me to speak today. This is the first international forum which CivilMPlus platform organized during the war. Because this war, which Russia launched against Ukraine, started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, when authoritarian regime collapsed as a result of Revolution of Dignity, and Ukraine obtained a chance for a quick democratic transformation. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin occupied Crimea and part of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. Because Putin is afraid not of NATO, Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. I represent Center for Civil Liberties, and together with other human rights organizations, we launched the Tribunal for Putin initiative after large-scale invasion. And I would like to emphasize on the role of civil society in this war. Because when international organizations evacuated their staff, it was common people who risked their lives to save others whom they have never met before. It was common people who tried to break encirclement and to reach sieged cities and settlements with humanitarian aid. It was common people who organized evacuation of civilians under constant Russian fires. It was common people who do uncommon things and who express a solidarity. And now I think in this war, the only best impact is that we all have a very sharp feeling. What does it mean to be a human beings? Center for Civil Liberties have been documented war crimes for 8 years already. But now, with other colleagues in the frame of Tribunal for Putin initiative, only for 8 months of Russian aggression, we have been documented 24,000 of war crimes. 24,000, it's a huge number, but it's only a tip of iceberg. And to be very honest, I will tell that we document human pain. We document how Russian troops deliberately shelling on residential buildings, churches, schools, hospitals, evacuation corridors, humanitarian assistance. We documented rape, murder, torture, abductions, and other kinds of offense against civilians. That's why for us it's very clear that Ukraine is fighting not only for territories. Ukraine is fighting first and foremost for the people who live on these territories. We will never left our people alone for killings and torture. And I would like to emphasize that in this war, we are fighting for a freedom in all senses. And victory for Ukraine is not only means to repeal all Russian troops from Ukrainian territories and liberate completely Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia regions, as well as Crimea Peninsula. But victory for Ukraine is to succeed in the process of democratic transformation and to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, the government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police serve people and do not beat peaceful student demonstrations. And I would finalize my introductory speech with a very simple fact that we live in a very interconnected world. And there are a lot of things which have no limitation in state borders. And we need proactive solidarity and support from international community, because the only spread of freedom make our world safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandra. Do stay with us because there might be questions from the floor and you may also want to react to what other speakers will say. Could you pass me the mic, please? Because the next person to speak is Oleksandra Slotty. And as you already know, and as I already know, he's the State Secretary for Education from the Office of the Mayor of Berlin.
Ja, sehr geehrte, geht das?
Seems to work.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Sehr geehrte Frau Matviychuk, sehr geehrter Herr Lüttenberg, sehr geehrter Herr stellvertretender Botschafter Yemelyanov, sehr geehrter Herr Melle, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Ich freue mich sehr, heute gemeinsam mit Ihnen das 4. internationale Bürgermeisterin von Berlin, Franziska Giffey, zu überbringen, die heute leider selber nicht hier sein kann, weil jeden Dienstag um diese Zeit der Senat von Berlin seine Kabinettssitzung hat. Fast 9 Monate ist es nun her, dass Russland seinen völkerrechtswidrigen Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine begann. Dieser Krieg bedeutet unbeschreibliches Leid für die Menschen in der Ukraine und bringt massive Zerstörung mit sich. Und er hat auch zahlreiche Folgen weit über die Ukraine hinaus. Was für ein Einschnitt das für die europäische Friedensordnung global, aber auch für Deutschland und Berlin bedeutet, hat Bundeskanzler Scholz mit dem Begriff der Zeitenwende deutlich gemacht. Wir haben in den vergangenen Monaten erlebt, wie zerstörerisch der Krieg ist. Wir haben aber auch erlebt, welchen bewundernswerten Mut und Einsatz die Menschen in der Ukraine an den Tag legen, um ihre Freiheit und ihr Selbstbestimmungsrecht zu verteidigen. Ihnen gilt weiterhin unsere ganze Solidarität und ich will an dieser Stelle vielleicht auch kurz außerhalb meiner Rede sagen, Solidarität ist so ein Begriff, der für viele Menschen vielleicht auch schon etwas abgedroschen klingt. Das ist ja aus meiner Sicht gar nicht. Und als Staatssekretär für Bildung, der in Berlin verantwortlich ist für 450.000 Schülerinnen und Schüler und 33.000 Lehrerinnen und Lehrer, will ich schon auch sagen, ein großes Zeichen der Solidarität und wir sind sehr stolz darauf, dass es das bisher einmalig und nur hier in Berlin, einmalig in Europa und hier in Berlin gibt. Das ist die deutsch-ukrainische
Encounters, which we are funding together with the Ukrainian embassy. And we were happy to inaugurate this only recently, and I think that these are signals that we can send. These are signals that people are expecting and that are crucial in these times. The great degree of international support has been remarkable. Together with our allies within NATO, together with many other states, Germany is firmly standing on the side of Ukraine and is providing a variety of support. At the level of the United Nations, the majority of states has made very clear that they stand against Russian aggression and is condemning it. We need to make clear again and again that we want an end of Russian aggression. We want peace in Ukraine. We want the standards of international law to be respected. We want the territorial integrity of Ukraine to be restored. Within Ukraine, in the neighboring states, and here in Berlin, we are experiencing that the support and solidarity with these objectives is essentially also supported by civil society. And this international forum on European Ukraine is a sign of this. This is where civil society, diplomats, authorities, committed and engaged citizens can come together. Today and tomorrow, they'll have an interesting exchange on how to deal with this criminal war of aggression. But they're also discussing future perspectives for Ukraine. This is promising many important impulses and ideas and offers many opportunities for networking. I'm very pleased that this event is taking place in Berlin. It is also an important contribution to us making visible our solidarity with Ukraine. Our city, I believe, is a good place to resolve the pressing issues of our time. I'd like to thank the organizers and all the participants very much for your important engagement in this conference. Over the past months, Berlin has presented itself as a city with open arms, willing to receive refugees. And the broad civil society engagement is a sign of this. And it is broadly supported. Let's just think of Polish groups or other groups who have organized thousands of transports, organized accommodation, organized interpreters, collected donations, organized demonstrations, etc. It has been and continues to be very moving to see this wave of solidarity and active support. And it isn't possible to thank all the people who were involved in these initiatives sufficiently. Given the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and the arrival of refugees, it has always been important to the Berlin Senate to work in close cooperation with civil society. Our governing mayor has quickly installed a civil society advisory board. The Senate and the Berlin administration have made many efforts to ensure adequate accommodation for the many arrivals of people from Ukraine, also working in close partnership with civil society, because many Berliners have actually opened their homes to accommodate refugees, and that needs to be acknowledged. Altogether, since the beginning of the war, we have received around 43,000 Ukrainians or more, 340,000 Ukrainians in our city. Around 100,000 have stayed in Berlin, but more are looking for places to stay, not least with a view to the coming winter. But from coping with the crisis in the short term, there is growing closeness of our two countries. The German-Ukrainian School for Cooperation was opened recently. It's a project that has so far been unique in Europe. It offers a possibility to students to prepare for the German Abitur and the Ukrainian school leaver certificate. They learn both languages, and there are plans for the globally first Ukrainian Cultural Institute here in Berlin, the first that is to be founded in a country other than Ukraine. I think these are important signals and concrete steps that we can take to showcase our close alliance with Ukraine. But more support will be needed in the future. In Germany and within the European Union, we need to make sure that we actively push for peace and democracy and a good and self-determined future of the Ukraine. This is true not least with a view to the coming winter, which is likely to worsen the situation for many in the Ukraine. Berlin is continuing its support of acute measures. It is supporting the reconstruction of infrastructure, for example, and it wants to also support future growth and rebuilding of the country. So for the next months and years, it is our job to work at different levels in order to develop suitable measures. Having said all this, it must be clear that together we can achieve more. State and civil society therefore need to strengthen their exchange. I believe that this fourth international forum on the European Ukraine can make an important contribution to this. So I wish all of you good discussions. Let's push for an end of the war of aggression in the Ukraine. Let's continue to support the people in Ukraine. Let's support peace, freedom and democracy, and let's stand together in solidarity. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Slotty. And even if I weren't listening to the brilliant Ukrainian simultaneous translation, I would be impressed by the sincerity and seriousness of what Mr. Slotty has said, And of course, with the translation, it brings even fuller picture. And it is very symbolic and meaningful that Mr. Slotty mentioned the Ukrainian diplomats in this respect. So our next speaker is quite logical, Maksym Yemelyanov from the Ukrainian embassy. Please go on.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's really a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank you, CivilMPlus, for organizing this conference. It's also probably for the first time that I'm opening this panel discussion with the Nobel laureate. And let me use this opportunity, if Oleksandra is with us online, to congratulate her on this well-deserved prize. I think that this award is also a recognition of the efficiency of Ukrainian civil diplomacy, and this is outstanding performance, and this is the great dedication of Oleksandra, and also her synergy with the state diplomacy that we have felt throughout these years, including during her visits to Berlin. I'm also very glad to share the floor today with Matthias Lüttenberg, who is our good friend, and cooperation with the foreign ministry and your openness, Matthias, to our communication with our civil society representatives have made German Foreign Office not that foreign for us, and we really appreciate this. And if I may also to say thank you to Mr. Slotty, who just mentioned the opening of first German-Ukrainian school that I had the privilege to open with him just a few weeks ago. I think that this is a great initiative, and I strongly encourage you, and I appreciate that your Senate of Berlin is working with us to open similar schools also in other German lands. I cannot miss this opportunity to say thank you to our German friends for providing shelter to over 1 million of my countrymen and countrywomen. We really appreciate this. Our success, Ukraine's success in defending itself, owes to the links and our close cooperation with the civil society. And as Oleksandra mentioned, this started certainly not since February 2014. This started at least during the Revolution of Dignity. For many young people in Ukraine, that revolution opened the idea to become civil servants. And many civil servants took part in that revolution against the outrage of the highest officials. Many from both groups are now on the front line. Some died, but all believe in Ukrainian victory, and all will go till the end. Throughout these 8 years, we managed to establish a stronger state and stronger civil institutions. And these institutions have managed to stand. I remember well Ukrainian civil society advocating for EU candidacy for Ukraine. They gave all needed arguments and finished with promising to control Ukrainian government in implementing reforms. Well, I can tell you frankly that they keep their promises, they're controlling the government, and I think that we, by joining our efforts, are bringing progress closer. Now we're working to open a new chapter in our relations with the European Union and NATO. And I hope, we all hope, that Germany will not shy away here and be the driving force behind these integration processes. we don't have to repeat past mistakes. Another example is one of our anti-corruption activists who claim that weapons for Ukraine are the best instruments for Ukraine's reconstruction tomorrow. And I can only add here that weapons for Ukraine is also the best humanitarian aid that we can have right now. Liberation of Kherson reinforced our confidence that we can win this war. But to achieve this, we need more military support from our partners, including of Germany. These investments clearly pays off. It pays off because we are saving hundreds of thousands of lives of Ukrainians. And this war goes on. And Russia is losing on the battlefield because of sanctions and even in the eyes of its own allies. Together, we must continue to speak with those who still do not hear. We need to be united to win their hearts and minds in different countries, also in Asia and in Africa. Justice and the rule of law must prevail. And since I mentioned justice, and since we are talking to each other in mid-November, allow me to touch to one specific point, namely the restoration of historical justice and the recognition of the terrible genocide of Ukrainian people known as Holodomor. The 90th anniversary of that crime became a year of the new Moscow genocidal war against Ukraine. And once again, Russians deny our right to exist. Throughout the 20th century, a vacuum of justice and truth was enabling totalitarian crimes. Half measures in dealing with the truth led us, finally, to the situation that we have right now in the 21st century. It is also not a coincidence that the memorial on Russia was last one to fall before this genocidal war full of hate and brutality has started. So we all call German politicians, civil society in Germany, to pay more attention to the forgotten and devalued genocide of millions of people. And this message goes way beyond the Bundestag. Probably you know that we're working on the resolution of the German parliament to recognize Holodomor as a genocide against Ukrainian people. So our one voice policy of state and civil society makes our demands more credible, and we sound louder. We also need to speak loud about the war crimes by Russia, about the children deported by Russia to reboot their identity. We speak about tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of children deported to Russia. Is that not a genocide? Combined with the permanent destruction of our culture, language, and denial of the statehood and history. There is not a surprise, and it doesn't impress anyone right now when Ukrainian diplomats are asking for weapons. But it impresses me when human rights activists are pleading for weapons and asking to free or unchain leopards and other creatures. So I can only encourage you to do this further and explain our partners why this is our urgent need. And as for us, as for Ukrainian government, as for our embassy, we're here to support, and we're always happy and open for friendly and constructive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yemelyanov. And may I say that you mentioned the strong civil society and the strong army that Ukraine has developed. Well, it looks like Ukraine has developed a rather strong diplomatic service as well. And now I give the floor to Matthias Lüttenberg from the German Federal Ministry for Foreign Affairs.
Dear Andriy, dear Maksym, dear State Secretary, dear Oleksandra, ladies, dear colleagues of CivilMPlus, of Austausch, ladies and gentlemen, after almost 9 months of this cruel war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, it was so good to see the pictures of the weekend, the Ukrainian flag in Kherson, people celebrating the arrival of Ukrainian troops. There were so few good news since February. But at the same time, we know that the winter is going to become hard, maybe even hardly bearable for the people in Ukraine. In many places, the inhuman and targeted attacks of Russia to the energy infrastructure were made in order to stop the water and power supply from functioning. However, people will have to survive in winter without heating, without water. Russia again is attacking the people in Ukraine, a society which has so impressively proved its resilience since the beginning of the war. The latest attacks show once again how little the Russian government is caring for the people in Ukraine, how they are inflicting so much suffering to the people of Ukraine. The German government has been supporting Ukraine right from the beginning. We have just launched a coordinating mechanism among the G7 in order to re-establish the energy infrastructure of Ukraine and to help as fast and as effectively as possible. However, this is hard to do. We are ready to continue supporting Ukraine as long as this will be necessary. This is what Federal Chancellor Scholz says. This is what my minister Annalena Baerbock is saying. This is what we all are saying. We want to support you with military means and with humanitarian means, with money, because so far it looks like Russia is continuing its war. The fightings, the hostilities in Donbass and other regions is going on, and the suppression is going on. Therefore, it is so important that there is such an active Ukrainian civil society playing a very impressive role in dealing with the consequences of the war. Before the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014, Ukraine already had a very strong and dedicated civil society, which had a very positive influence on the reform process, which was committed to establish a democratic European Ukraine, and which did all for Ukraine to fulfill the prerequisites to become a member of the EU. Many of the initiatives were started by the Ukrainian civil society. For example, Ukrainian initiatives against corruption. These initiatives wouldn't have been possible without civil society. Of course, the Foreign Office will remain a strong partner on the way of Ukraine towards a EU membership. With the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian civil society adapted very quickly. In many places, organizations closely cooperate with the state, where the state resources are no longer sufficient, and I'm impressed by this work. They are supporting IDPs, they are collecting donations for the military, and of course, they are also documenting violations of human rights and war crimes by the Russians. We expect horrible news from Kherson in the coming days. It will become clear again which cruel consequences the Russian invasion has put on Ukraine, and it becomes clear that only together with our support, Ukrainians can fight against the Russian aggression. I'm afraid that the war will continue for some more time. However, we have to start thinking about the time after the war already now. Civil society will play an important role. It will be not enough to re-establish civil infrastructure. Overcoming psychological consequences and dealing with war crimes will also be essential. And of course, there will also be the question of redistributing means and of establishing a new state. Here, I count on a strong role of Ukrainian municipalities. I'm very grateful that there are such initiatives as this forum. An exchange and debates, discussions are so important for civil society. And that is why Germany is so interested in supporting the Ukrainian civil society, for example, with the help of programs for journalists or with the help of projects in order to support reforms on the way to the rule of law. Please continue in that way. Your work is essential for the future of Ukraine, for its people. And I see that you have a very interesting program ahead of you. I wish you a fruitful exchange, interesting debates, and success in your future work, which is so important for Ukraine. Thank you.
Dankeschön, Dankeschön. And the program is made very interesting also because of your participation and of the very distinct and clear-cut message that you're sending, Mr. Lüttenberg. Now we have something like 15 minutes to ask questions. Yes, there is a hand. Roberta, please. Please, would you introduce yourself? No, and don't take the mic in your hands.
Thank you very much. My name is Nikolai Klemenuk. I'm a journalist from Berlin, and I want to draw your attention to one very important topic. When Oleksandra Matviychuk opened her statement, she began with saying that the war of aggression started not this year, but in February 2014. Both German speakers referred to the 9 months of the war of aggression. It is very important to bear in mind that the war of aggression started 8 years ago. What happened this year is a phase of this war. It's full-scale invasion. This is what began this year. And we have to, we shouldn't forget this. We shouldn't...
And the question is?
It is not a question. It is very... Yeah, thank you very much.
You made your message. Maybe our German friends would like to comment.
Thank you for your statement, of course. I fully agree. I mean, I've been working since 2014 on Ukraine. I was part of the Normandy for 7 years. So you don't have to tell me about what happened back then, but you will have to admit that there's a difference between what's happening since February and what happened since 2014. But in general terms, I of course agree with you. The Russian aggression, the Russian war, if you may call it a war back in 2014, of course started in 2014. Does it make a difference for our conversation today? I don't think so.
Thank you. And Mr. Slotty?
Ja, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich bin Ihnen sehr dankbar für den Hinweis.
Yes, I'm very grateful for you pointing this out. I think it's something that we actually need to remind ourselves of, also as a lesson for the future. You know, when you've grown up in Germany and you've learned about German and European history, then as a young person, you'll have learned about the importance of peace and freedom. The Second World War, which, okay, is a while back now, and, you know, it won't be long, and there won't be anybody left alive who's experienced the Second World War. But everyone in Germany has been taught at school what war means, not least for civil society, and that the response of the community of states in 2014 wasn't as strong, that there wasn't talk of preparations for a war, I think is because we always had hope, that there was this principle of hope to retain peace for the people in the region as long as possible. I think that wish is just very strong in all of us. I don't think anybody closed their eyes after the annexation of the Crimea to the fact that Russia was being aggressive. But I do think that the European community of states and also NATO tried to the very last moment to use diplomatic channels to de-escalate that situation. That the situation became what it is now. That's something clearly that we all wanted to.
Thank you. Sometimes it's very important to raise a controversial issue. For us, this is not controversial, of course, but it may require further explanations. So thank you, Mr. Humniuk, for for making your statement. And the next, please.
Дякую. Моє ім'я Юлія Палєхіна, я юристка громадської організації.
My name is Julia Palechina. I'm a legal expert working for SICH. That's an organization supporting people with their legal affairs. I'd like to clarify something. The Kremlin has pursued aggressive rhetoric towards Ukraine since 2008. If we look at what has just been said about our state, we can say that politics began even earlier than 2014 to...
Thank you very much. Without, or rather risking to be an ageist, I must tell you, Yulia, that in my memory it started even before 2008, and I can quote examples. But then every one of us has their own experience, and every one of us is impressed by different things. And it's very, very important that we share those impressions. Please go on.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. My name is Dave Elstrode. I'm with the Human Rights House Foundation based in Geneva. I have a question for Mr. Yemelyanov and Ambassador Lüttenberg, specifically around the state of the transatlantic partnership now and its response to the war. With recent elections in Sweden, elections in Italy, the midterm elections in the United States, I think there is concern that perhaps the level of ongoing support for Ukraine will begin to dwindle. I'm just curious of your thoughts as you see the future.
Thank you very much. We'll take the next question, Roberta, from the lady, some 3 or 4 rows, but after our speaker's reply.
Well, thank you for the question on the transatlantic relations. I think if there's one thing that worked really well, even since before the war started, that's the transatlantic cooperation on Ukraine, our support for Ukraine, our coordinating of sanctions. Like a year ago, we were already seeing what was going on, the buildup of the Russian armed forces, and we were consolidating our positions on what sanctions are we ready to take and how we're going to advocate for those. We started our démarches, we got ourselves ready, and we thought that this might still change Putin's plans and change the equation for him. But on the other side, this cooperation then continued and even reinforced. We as the G7 presidency this year are, of course, in the comfortable position of hosting a lot of G7 events, so we are working very closely together with our colleagues. You mentioned Sweden, Italy, and the midterms. Sweden, I don't think that we should really start worrying about Sweden. It's still a country which is looking to become a member of NATO. This hasn't changed, so we see a strong ally here. In Italy, the first things that the new government did was reaching out to Ukraine, and I think this was a very important signal of their commitment, which will continue. They have no... Well, I think they will continue delivering weapons and doing the stuff that they've done before. Of course, on the sanctions debate, I don't see any irritation at this point as well. And the same is very much true for the midterms. I think the result is not sending shockwaves into our unity, neither in NATO nor the bilateral relations. So let's see. But I'm still very optimistic that we will continue doing this jointly, not only Germany and the US, but also with Ukraine and with the NATO and with other partners in the G7 in the first place.
Thank you.
If I may just add here that we are very grateful, Germany, for G7 presidency this year, and every meeting was arranged in close cooperation with Ukraine, including the participation of our president, our foreign minister. So we were directly involved, and with respect to midterm elections, we don't see any signs that there will be a diminishing level of support. Support is there, bipartisan support, so this is important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we take the last question from the floor because we are running out of time, and I still have one question. All right?
My name is Eva Quistorp, and as we have the question of the relationship between politics and civil society here, I just want to remember that I was member of the European Parliament for the Greens in the 90s. That means I visited Kyiv, Minsk, Moscow, Kazakhstan, and tried to support the democracy movement and new building up of civil society in the former Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union. So in a way, I feel very much linked with civil society, which is here present, and I'm very sad that not so many journalists, scientists, and politicians and people of culture have been aware of what type of regime Putin has been building up with the KGB and the mafia since the 90s, and then especially since 2000, 2008, 2012, and there was a war in Georgia and in Chechnya and so on. I think it's good that you remind that German politics was not, and German media and science was not really always aware what was a fight of Ukraine for liberty and democracy, and was not always very much clear on the side if you look into energy politics. But I thank very much the speakers that they have described how Germany tries to be on your side now, and there I would have a question. As violence against women in wars, but in normal daily life is rather worldwide, in Europe and Germany too, and I have been supporting the installation of the International Court of Crime and to introduce crimes and violence against women as a war crime too. I would like to know, can you imagine how the Ukrainian embassy, how the foreign ministry and the schools here in Berlin and the lady mayor could support especially women in civil society in Ukraine?
Thank you. I think we got the essence, and who wants to start to answer? And I remind you that Oleksandra Matviychuk is probably still with us. Maybe she will want to chip in. Yeah, go on.
Ja, herzlichen Dank für die Frage. Ich sag mal,
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Well, for the federal state of Berlin, of course, we won't be able to install international courts of justice to pursue international crimes. You'll know that the European Union has looked at international justice in particular and developed quite a lot with regards to that. Now, what's Berlin doing specifically for Ukrainian children and teenagers, those that have come to Germany without their parents, because either they have lost their parents in the war or because the parents had to stay behind in Ukraine? We have actually provided them with pretty comprehensive psychological support. I would go as far as saying that all children and young persons were received well. We have almost doubled the number of our psychologists at schools. We have been able to employ more psychologists, but of course we need to see that everyone at school has been traumatized by events in the Ukraine, and that's not just children and young people who are bringing their experiences of the war to Germany, who had to leave their families behind. But we're also confronted, and this is new for us, we're also confronted with the fact that German kids, German parents, teachers fear the war. Of course, it's not comparable to a situation where you are affected by war yourself, but the geographical proximity of the war is something that really affected people. Seeing that this war affects people to whom there are close relations within civil society. So this war actually felt very close to our own borders, to Germany. And we also supported teachers with extra educational programs and in order to help them cope with this very specific situation, to do something. Have we done anything explicit for girls and young women? No, but I'm happy to take this on board.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Oleksandra Matviychuk. And would you, Oleksandra, please combine your answer with the closing remarks for this session? Hello? Hello?
I would like to express gratitude for questions, and I will try briefly answer to two of them with that fact that all this hell, all this level of Russian atrocities which we now face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. And for decades, the voice of human rights defenders from our part of the world wasn't heard. Maybe we was heard in the HDM OSCE or in UN Committee on Human Rights, but not in the rooms where political decisions were taking place. And this is a clear example that human rights and peace has inextricable connection, and country which systematically violate human rights obligation is a threat to the whole region. But it's also an example that total impunity became a part of culture, because Russian military committed war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, and they have never been punished for this. It led to a situation when Russians start to think they can do whatever they wanted. So I will conclude my answering with the point that this is not the war between two states, Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And Putin, he tried to convince the whole world that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. He tried to convince the whole world that the only physical force is matter and authoritarianism is the best way of governing of society. And we have to win this value dimension of the war, and in order to do it, we need to provide justice. We need to establish international tribunal and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other war criminals accountable. Only thus we will be able to honestly answer that, yes, it was a period of temporal law disorder when nothing works, when me as a human rights lawyer with 20 years of experience have no legal instrument how to stop Russian atrocities, when the whole world couldn't stop the war for 8 years, when the whole UN system wouldn't able to save even the one single medic, Victoria Bidina, from separation from her 4-year-old daughter, which was sent to filtration camp and released only recently. But we fixed it. We hold Russian war criminals accountable because justice is working and rule of law is essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandra. And 30 seconds each from Mr. Yemelyanov and Mr. Lüttenberg, closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists for this very good exchange. I still feel humbled and honored that we as the German government are considered a partner in this undertaking. I would nevertheless argue that we are not trying to be at Ukraine's side. We are at Ukraine's side, and I think Ukraine knows it and feels it. And when Maksym points to additional military support, he knows that we will be ready to provide more military support. Maybe we're not talking about the favorite animals of your your ambassador, but we are of course continuing our support, especially in air defense and artillery, as we've done for some time. But this is maybe not a topic for today's discussion. I really think, and I learned that over the last 8 years when I'm dealing with Ukraine, how important civil society really is, and we had many good conversations over the last couple of years, and I really wish that now Ukraine will be proud and will tap the resources of the civil society to its full extent. Thank you.
I just want to add that we all know that when this war started, and we all know that how many mistakes have been made in the past, but we have to concentrate on the future of free Ukraine. And in order to get our victory, we have to stay united, all of us, on different fronts: military, civil society, diplomatic, and with the help of our partners. And I'm sure that we will prevail. So thank you and have a good conference.
Yes, we shall prevail. Not only will, but we shall prevail, which is a much stronger modality. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you the audience.